Official death records from Greene County, Ohio list a man named Caesar Bowen as having died in 1888 at the recorded age of 126 years. The cemetery ledger notes his birth year as 1762, during the rule of King George III, when Ohio was still largely unmapped wilderness. What makes historians uneasy is this. 7 different notarized affidavits from well-known citizens swore that they had known Caesar since their own childhoods, each confirming he already appeared very old even then. The county coroner who examined his body observed dental wear and bone density unlike anything he had ever seen in a living person, yet he refused to challenge the age claim. For over a century, academics quietly dismissed the case, filing it away in archives too disturbing to fully explore. What was found in Caesar's cabin after his death, a collection of 63 journals written in 3 clearly different handwriting styles, all apparently his own, suggests something far stranger than mere longevity. Before we continue with the story of Caesar Bowen and his impossible lifespan, if you're watching from Ohio or anywhere in the United States, comment below where you're from. Hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because stories like Caesar's deserve to be remembered. Now let me take you back to where this mystery truly begins. Understanding how one man could witness the birth of a nation, the rise and fall of slavery, and the start of the industrial age requires us to first understand the world he claimed to be born into. Greene County, Ohio in the 1880s was a place of modest prosperity. Rolling farmland stretched between small towns where everyone thought they knew their neighbor's business. Xenia, the county seat, had rebuilt itself after a destructive tornado in 1874, and the railroad brought new trade and strangers. The community took pride in its abolitionist history, a place where underground railroad routes were remembered with reverence, where memories of the war still influenced daily life. Caesar Bowen lived about 2 miles outside Xenia in a cabin locals agreed had stood for at least 60 years, possibly longer. The structure itself seemed warped by age. Its hand-hewn logs darkened almost to black, its stone chimney leaning at an angle that seemed impossible. Cedar shakes on the roof were held down with river stones, a construction method not used locally since the 1810s. The old man was a familiar sight in town, walking with a twisted hickory cane he claimed to have cut himself in 1799. He stood barely 5 feet tall, his frame so bent with age that children sometimes mistook him for a heap of rags until he moved. His skin had the texture of old leather left too long in the sun, lined with deep wrinkles mapping a lifetime of suffering. Yet his eyes, everyone agreed, were unforgettable. They were unnervingly clear, the pale brown of creek water over sand, and they focused on people with an intensity that made grown men shift uneasily. He made his living doing small repairs, mending harnesses and tools with a skill that suggested decades of practice. His hands, twisted with what people assumed was arthritis, still moved with surprising precision. He spoke rarely, in a dry whisper that forced listeners to lean in. And when he spoke, he used strange archaic words like thee and thou, phrases from an earlier century. The town physician, Dr. Harold Sutton, had been trying to examine Caesar for 3 years. His vital signs are impossible, he told his wife over dinner in 1887. His pulse barely reaches 40 beats per minute. His breathing rate suggests deep sleep, yet he is fully awake. I have read every medical text I can find, and I see no precedent. Perhaps he is simply very healthy for his age. Margaret Sutton suggested. That's the problem, Margaret. If the records are correct, and he really is 125 years old, his age alone should have killed him decades ago. The oldest verified person I know of lived to 108. Caesar claims nearly 20 years more than that. The records Dr. Sutton referred to were kept at the Greene County Courthouse, preserved through multiple filing systems. A manumission document dated July 4, 1826 freed Caesar, Negro man aged about 64 years, from the service of Jeremiah Hawthorne of Virginia. It also noted that Caesar had been with the Hawthorne family since 1784, when Jeremiah's father purchased him as an adult of significant years. Even the most cautious estimates placed Caesar's birth in the early 1760s. But Caesar's own accounts, shared with various people and recorded by local historians, described an even more extraordinary picture. He claimed to remember the Stamp Act riots, the tensions that led to revolution. He said he had been a boy during Pontiac's rebellion, when the French still held influence in the Ohio Valley. He spoke of winters so cold trees exploded from the frost, and summers when the sun glowed red through months of forest fires. I was born on a tobacco farm in Tidewater, Virginia, he told a reporter from the Xenia Gazette in 1885, one of the few long interviews he ever gave. My mother was 16. She died that year of fever. My father I never knew. He was sold before I could walk. The master's name was Josiah Warren. He worked 200 acres with 23 souls. I was the smallest and weakest. They did not expect me to survive my first winter. The reporter, Thomas Fletcher, expected a short human interest story about the county's oldest resident. Instead, he spent 4 hours in Caesar's cabin, filling notebook after notebook, his hand cramping from writing so fast. "What do you remember most clearly from your childhood?" Fletcher asked. Caesar was silent so long Fletcher thought he had fallen asleep. The old man sat by the empty fireplace. It was July, scorching hot outside, yet the cabin was unusually cool. At last Caesar spoke. He remembered the smell of tobacco drying, sunlight streaming through wall cracks in gold stripes, the sound of singing at night, old songs from Africa, meanings long forgotten, yet sung because mothers had taught them. He also remembered hunger, always hungry. They were fed enough to work, but never enough to feel full. "You must have seen great change in your lifetime," Fletcher said. "The revolution, the country's birth. I saw empires rise and fall," Caesar said, voice distant. "I saw slavery spread like a sickness and finally die. Cities burned. I witnessed horrors that would break your mind if I described them fully. But the strangest part is that I remember everything. Every face, voice, moment of suffering and brief joy. They pile up like stones in your chest, pressing down, making each breath difficult." Fletcher's article was printed, but the editor cut most of Caesar's darker statements. The full interview remained in Fletcher's personal files and later became crucial evidence. In spring 1887, Caesar weakened. He appeared in town less often, moving with even more difficulty. Dr. Sutton made house visits despite Caesar's protest that no doctor had ever helped him and none ever would. On October 12, 1887, Caesar Bowen stopped speaking suddenly, in mid-conversation with neighbor Samuel Pritchard, a farmer who sometimes brought food. Pritchard later testified, his statement preserved in county records. He found Caesar sitting as usual, staring into space. When Pritchard asked how he was, Caesar turned, opened his mouth, then froze. His eyes widened, mouth open, no sound. Thinking he had a stroke, Pritchard rushed to help, but Caesar pushed him away and pointed to the door, signaling him to leave. Pritchard returned the next morning with Dr. Sutton. They found Caesar in the same chair, alive and responsive to touch but completely mute. His eyes followed them, but he made no attempt to speak. Sutton found nothing physically wrong with his throat or mouth. "It is as if he has chosen silence," he wrote. "Why would a man who survived so long suddenly lock himself in it?" In the following weeks, Caesar's condition worsened. He ate mechanically without awareness, never left his chair by the fireplace, and showed what Dr. Sutton called episodes of temporal confusion. "I visited him on Tuesday afternoon," the doctor recorded, "and found him staring at the wall with such intensity. I followed the direction of his stare, thinking I might see whatever had caught his attention. There was nothing at all, just the old wooden logs and dried mortar. I said his name again and again before he finally reacted, and when he slowly turned toward me, the look on his face was filled with such deep fear that I stepped back without thinking. Almost instantly that look disappeared, replaced by his usual calm and distant expression, as if nothing had happened. The local children, who were always drawn to strange things, slowly began whispering stories about the old man who had stopped speaking. They said that if you passed his cabin late at night, you could sometimes see him through the window, his lips moving quietly, as though he were talking to people no one else could see. They said his shadow fell in the wrong direction, not matching where the light came from. They said he was counting down to something, though no one knew how they came up with that idea. Martha Whitt, a widow who lived closest to Caesar's land, told her prayer group that she once heard singing coming from his cabin in the middle of the night. It was not Caesar's voice, she said, but many voices blended together, singing in a language she did not recognize. When she finally gathered the courage to look the next morning, Caesar was alone, and there was no sign that anyone else had been there. Then, on a bitterly cold night in January of 1888, Samuel Pritchard was jolted awake by loud pounding on his door. When he opened it, he found Caesar Bowen standing barefoot in the snow, wearing only his nightshirt, his breath coming out in rough, uneven gasps. Before Pritchard could say a word, Caesar collapsed. They carried him back to his cabin, and Dr. Sutton was called for. For 3 days, Caesar burned with a fever so intense it should have taken his life. He tossed and turned, calling out names while lost in delirium. The names meant nothing to anyone listening: Abigail, Jonas, Scipio, Delilah, Samuel. Each name was followed by pleas, apologies, or broken pieces of conversation. "Tell them I tried," he said once, clearly, his eyes open but fixed on something far beyond the ceiling. "Tell them it was never meant to last this long." On the 4th day, the fever finally broke. Caesar opened his eyes, looked straight at Dr. Sutton, and spoke his first words in 3 months. "How many years has it been?" "Since when?" the doctor asked gently. "Since I was young," Caesar whispered. Then he closed his eyes and fell into such a deep sleep that the doctor had to hold a mirror under his nose again and again to make sure he was still alive. Caesar never fully recovered from the illness, but he did begin speaking again from time to time, usually in short sentences that often seemed disconnected from the present moment. Dr. Sutton began keeping careful notes of everything Caesar said, hoping to understand what he called the patient's moments of clarity and confusion. During one visit in early February of 1888, Caesar said something that changed the course of the doctor's curiosity. "I should have died with the others. On the crossing. That's when it should have ended." "What crossing?" Dr. Sutton asked, though he suspected the answer. "The Middle Passage," Caesar said softly. "But I was born here, born in Virginia. I never made that crossing, so why do I remember it? Why do I remember the ship's hold, the smell of sickness and death, the chains cutting into my ankles? Why do I remember Africa, Dr. Sutton? I have never been to Africa." The doctor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air seeping through the cabin walls. "Perhaps these were stories you heard. Memories passed down," he offered. "No," Caesar said. His clear, unsettling eyes locked onto the doctor with sudden force. "These are my memories, or someone else's memories. I carry them the same way I carry my own. I remember things that happened before I was born. I remember dying, Dr. Sutton, many times, in many different ways. And still I am here, breathing, remembering, gathering years and memories that were never meant for me." Dr. Sutton should have dismissed this as fever-born imagination. Instead, he asked quietly, "What do you think is happening to you?" "I think," Caesar said slowly, "that I am carrying more than one life. Somehow, in ways I cannot explain, the years and memories of others have been added to mine. I have lived long enough to know that God's justice sometimes appears in ways we cannot understand, and I believe I am both blessed and cursed to witness it." Over the next few weeks, Dr. Sutton visited often, pulled by a feeling he could not explain. Caesar spoke more during this time than he had in years, and his words always returned to the same ideas: memory, time, and the burden of witnessing. He described life on 3 different Virginia plantations in vivid detail, even though records showed he had only belonged to 2 families. He spoke about events from the Revolutionary War with the detail of someone who had been there, even though he was only a child at the time. He described the burning of Washington in 1814 as if he had seen it himself, his account matching history closely. "I was in the field when I heard," he said. "The August heat was heavy, tobacco plants tall enough to hide a man. The overseer came running, shouting that the British had taken the Capitol and burned it. I remember thinking that this is what empires do to each other. They destroy symbols of power, but forget that real power lies in the people who work the land, build the buildings, and create the wealth." Dr. Sutton wrote everything down, filling journal after journal with Caesar's words. He began checking records, searching for mistakes that might explain the impossible accuracy of these memories. He found none. Everything that could be verified matched known facts. Even more troubling were the small details Caesar mentioned, events not found in common histories, which the doctor could only confirm through old documents or by speaking with elderly locals who remembered family stories. I saw a man named Thomas Garrett help more than 2,000 slaves escape, Caesar said one afternoon. This was in Delaware years ago. I never met him, but I knew those who did. He was fined until he owned nothing, and he still kept helping. He repeated the words Garrett had spoken in court, word for word, asking the doctor if he understood the cost of that kind of courage. Not the kind praised in songs, but the kind that makes you a criminal in service of what is right. Dr. Sutton knew of Thomas Garrett and his work, but how Caesar knew such details remained a mystery. Caesar insisted he had never left Ohio since arriving there in 1826. As winter gave way to early spring, Caesar's body weakened further, but his mind seemed sharper than ever. He began asking the doctor to bring newspapers, almanacs, and maps. He studied them intensely as if searching for an answer hidden within the pages. "What are you looking for?" Dr. Sutton finally asked. "I am trying to know when," Caesar replied. "I have felt it coming for months. Time is catching up with me. All the borrowed years, all the memories that were never mine, they are coming due. I need to know when so I can prepare." "Prepare for what?" "For settling the account," Caesar said simply, "for giving back what was never truly mine." The turning point came in March of 1888, when Thomas Fletcher, the reporter who had interviewed Caesar 3 years earlier, returned to Xenia. Now working for a Cincinnati paper, he had never forgotten the old man. Hearing that Caesar was failing, he came to see him once more. Fletcher brought with him a bundle of letters he had received over the years from readers of his original article. Most were ordinary responses, stories of long-lived relatives, guesses about health, or religious explanations. But 3 letters stood out. The first was from a woman named Victoria Ashford of Richmond, Virginia. She wrote that her grandfather, before dying in 1879, had spoken of a slave named Caesar who worked on their plantation in the late 1700s. He said Caesar was unusually intelligent and seemed to know things beyond his place. He spoke as if he had read books, though no slave there had been taught to read. When Caesar was sold in 1795, her grandfather felt relief, as if something unnatural had finally left. The second letter came from a Methodist minister in Delaware, Reverend Josiah Crothers. He described visiting a 90-year-old man in 1850 who in his fever kept calling out for someone named Caesar. The man begged to confess and make things right before judgment. His daughter later told the minister that her father had owned a slave named Caesar in Virginia who ran away in 1808. She said her father always believed Caesar had drowned while trying to cross the river, but that he had been haunted by the belief that Caesar somehow survived. Do we carry memories that were never truly ours? How many of us hold the pain of those who came before us, stored in our bodies, in our dreams, in the way we walk through life each day? Dr. Sutton lifted his eyes from the journal entry and saw Caesar watching him with those disturbingly clear, steady eyes. "You think I'm mad?" the old man asked plainly. Dr. Sutton paused before answering. "I think," he said slowly, "that you have gone through something far beyond ordinary human experience. Whether this comes from a process we don't yet understand, or from absorbing the stories of others so deeply that they feel like your own memories, I can't say. But I do know that you believe these experiences are real, and I know you have lived far longer than should be possible. It's more than belief." Caesar replied, his voice suddenly intense. "I can picture the face of the woman who cared for me during a fever when I was 5 years old. Even though my mother had already died, I can describe the exact pattern of scars on the back of a man named Joshua, whom I met only once in 1812, yet I remember his beating as if it happened to me. I carry the weight of hundreds of lives, doctor, their happiness, their pain, their rare moments of peace, and their long years of suffering. And now, as I near the end, I feel them gathering. All those memories, all those people pressing close, waiting. Waiting for what?" Fletcher asked. "For balance," Caesar said quietly. "For the final reckoning. I told you time is catching up to me. What I didn't say is that I can feel all those borrowed years pulling back, like a debt that must be paid. Each day I feel heavier, more exhausted. This isn't just my body aging, it's as if every extra year I lived is now demanding payment all at once." Just when it seemed they had uncovered the full truth of Caesar's impossible life, something happened that forced everyone to question everything they believed. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who enjoys dark mysteries. Press like to support our work, and subscribe so you don't miss stories like this. Let's find out together what comes next. What followed in the final months of Caesar's life challenged the line between what seemed possible and what did not, between reason and the unexplainable. By late April of 1888, Caesar's cabin had turned into an unofficial research site. Dr. Sutton visited every day, sometimes twice. Fletcher remained in town, interviewing people and checking Caesar's claims against records. Together they confirmed dozens of historical details. Events Caesar described matched written records. People he claimed to have met could be verified. His knowledge of places and time periods proved accurate when investigated. Still, confirming history did not explain how one man could live so long. Martha Hoot, a widow who lived nearby, began helping care for Caesar. She brought food, cleaned the cabin, and stayed with him when the two men were busy elsewhere. She was the first to notice the physical changes that appeared in early May. His skin, she told the doctor one morning, her voice shaking, "It's getting thinner, almost see-through. I can see the veins and bones beneath. And his eyes, they're changing color. They used to be light brown, but now they look gray, like old glass." Dr. Sutton examined Caesar and confirmed what Martha saw. The old man's skin had become fragile and paper, thin, bruising with the lightest touch. His eyes looked cloudy, though his sight remained sharp. Most troubling was his rapid weight loss. Caesar had always been small, but now he seemed to be shrinking, as if something inside him was slowly being drained. Dr. Sutton asked. "Hollow," Caesar whispered, "like something is being pulled out of me. Not painfully, just steadily. I feel less solid, less here, as if I'm slowly changing from flesh into something else. Maybe memory, maybe a witness without a body." Fletcher, who had been organizing the journals nearby, looked up suddenly. "You're speaking in images."
"Metaphors, am I?"
Caesar asked softly. "I'm not sure anymore. The line between what is physical and what is remembered keeps fading. Sometimes I look at my hands and don't know if they're mine, or hands I remember, belonging to someone else who lived and worked and suffered in these same fields." On May 3rd, everything worsened. Sutton arrived that morning to find Caesar in deep distress. He sat stiff in his chair, eyes wide but unfocused, breathing fast and shallow. At first, the doctor feared a heart attack, but though Caesar's pulse was quick, it was steady. "What's happening?" Dr. Sutton asked urgently, gripping Caesar's wrist. "They're here," Caesar whispered, his voice echoing strangely in the small room. "All of them. Everyone whose story I carried, every memory I took in. They're all here around me, and they want their time back." Dr. Sutton saw nothing unusual in the cabin. Yet he could not ignore the terror in Caesar's eyes or the way his gaze followed things no one else could see. "Tell me what you feel," he said. "Be as clear as you can." "I'm remembering everything at once," Caesar said, words spilling out in a rush. "Every moment of every life I touched. It's too much. Lydia, whose children were sold away. I feel her grief as if it's happening now. Joshua, beaten for learning to read. I feel the whip on my own back. Sarah, who chose poison rather than more bondage. I taste the bitterness on my tongue. Thomas, who escaped to Canada. I feel his joy and his guilt for those left behind. They're all here. I can't tell which memories are mine anymore. I don't know who I am beneath all these years." Dr. Sutton wrote everything down, even as he knew he was recording something beyond medical science. Caesar's pupils were wide, his breathing uneven, yet none of his physical signs fully explained what was happening. "Focus on my voice," Dr. Sutton said calmly, using methods meant to soothe confused patients. "Stay in this place, this moment." "But that's the problem," Caesar said. Suddenly his voice shifted, becoming softer, higher, clearly female. "This moment isn't just one moment. It's every moment I've carried. I am Caesar, but I am also Lydia, Joshua, Sarah, Thomas. I am Abigail and Jonas and Scipio and Delilah and Samuel. I am the woman who performed the ritual when I was a child. I am the child I once was. I am the old man I've become. I am all of them at the same time, and the weight of it is breaking the walls between us." His voice changed again, deeper, rougher. then shifted once more with a different accent. Dr. Sutton watched in stunned horror as Caesar moved through different identities, each speaking briefly before fading into another. Fletcher arrived soon after, called by a terrified Martha Whit, who had heard the changing voices and run for help. Together they witnessed what Dr. Sutton could only describe as a complete breaking apart of identity. Over the next 3 days, the episodes grew stronger. Caesar moved through what seemed like dozens of different personalities. He spoke in regional dialects, the gullah tones of the Georgia coast, the sharp speech of Maryland's eastern shore, the gentle drawl of Virginia's tidewater. His voice shifted in pitch and speed. He answered to different names. He described the same event from multiple viewpoints, as if he had been many people at once. "I'm in the tobacco field," he said in a child's voice. "The sun is burning my back. I'm 12 years old." Then seamlessly, "I'm in the kitchen house. My hands are scarred from years of hot pots. I watch the master's children play." Another change. "I'm running through the forest at night following the North Star. My feet are bleeding, but I keep going." Dr. Sutton recorded everything with careful detail, page after page, yet privately he felt he was witnessing something beyond reason. He checked Caesar's temperature, pulse, breathing, and reflexes again and again, finding nothing that could explain the crisis. On the evening of May 5th, alone in his boarding house room, Dr. Sutton wrote in his private journal, "I am a man of science. I trained at one of the finest medical schools in this country. I believe in reason, in causes that can be studied and understood. Yet what I am seeing in Caesar Bowen defies all I know of the human mind and body. He seems to be dying while reliving every moment of an impossibly long life. These shifts in identity are too complete, too detailed, too consistent to be simple confusion. Each voice carries its own memories, emotions, and way of speaking. Without the historical proof, I would call this an extreme mental disorder. But the evidence points to something else entirely, something that suggests memory and consciousness work in ways we do not yet understand, in forms and patterns we still do not fully understand, in ways that may reach beyond a single body or even a single mind." He stopped for a moment, his pen suspended above the paper, then wrote again. "I keep asking myself whether what I am seeing is a kind of death unlike any other. Not the ending of one life, but the breaking apart of many lives that were held together inside one weak, fragile container. If Caesar truly carried the memories and experiences of others within him, what happens when that container can no longer hold them? Do they simply fade away, or is something far more complex taking place?" On May 6th, Caesar experienced a stretch of unusual clarity. He woke after a restless night and, for several hours, seemed entirely present, or at least as present as the Caesar that Dr. Sutton and Fletcher had come to recognize. "I owe you both an apology," he said, his voice thin but steady. "You've seen something frightening, something that should not exist. But you need to understand what is happening. You need to write it down, because this dispersal of gathered identity may matter more than we realize. Tell us what you understand," Fletcher said, his pencil already poised. Caesar took a long breath, forcing his eyes to focus. "When I was a child and that woman carried out her ritual, I don't think she fully knew what she was doing. I believe she worked from broken knowledge, old practices remembered only in pieces, brought from Africa and reshaped by desperation. She wanted something precious to survive. She wanted the stories to live on, the proof of suffering and resistance to last longer than the people who endured them. So she chose a vessel, me, small, sickly, and unlikely to live long otherwise. Somehow she tied those stories to me and turned me into a container for them." "But how?" Dr. Sutton asked. "By what means? I don't know the process," Caesar said quietly. "I only know the result. Whenever I came across another enslaved person who was dying or in pain or in danger of being erased from history, something inside me took them in. Not their bodies, but their essence, their memories, their lived experience, their witness. I became a living record, gathering testimonies that would otherwise have vanished, and with each one I gained time. Their remaining years were added to mine, stretching my life far beyond what it should have been." He paused, struggling for breath after speaking so much. "But nothing can last forever. The human body has limits. The human mind has limits. I passed those limits more than 100 years ago. Now those borrowed years, those stored memories are pulling away from me. Each person whose story I carried is taking back their time, their self, their separate being. And as that happens, I am coming apart. The Caesar born in 1762 is being peeled away layer by layer, revealing everyone else I carried inside. Is it painful? Dr. Sutton asked softly. Not in the body, Caesar replied. But imagine feeling your sense of who you are slowly dissolve. Imagine knowing yourself clearly, knowing what makes you you, and then feeling that blur together with dozens, even hundreds of other lives. Imagine no longer being sure whether the face you remember is your mother's or someone else's, whether the childhood memory belongs to you or to another person. That is what is happening. I am becoming everyone I ever carried, and in doing so, I am becoming no one at all. Fletcher finally looked up from his notes, his face tense with concern. Is there anything we can do? Anything to make it easier? Caesar smiled, gentle and tired. You already are. You are witnessing my witness. When I am gone, the journals will remain, but they are only ink and paper. You have seen the truth behind the words. You have seen the cost of carrying such a weight. That matters more than you know. The clarity faded soon after. By evening, Caesar had returned to his fractured state, drifting through different voices and identities. Still, the conversation gave Dr. Sutton and Fletcher a way to understand what they were seeing. On May 7th, something entirely new began. Caesar started speaking in languages neither man recognized. The rhythm suggested West African roots, but the words themselves were unfamiliar. His voice shifted in ways that should not have been possible for such an old, damaged body. Deep echoing tones, sharp wailing cries, steady chanting that filled the small cabin. Martha Whit, who had been cooking nearby, dropped the plate in her hands. That's not natural, she whispered. A human being shouldn't be able to make sounds like that, doctor. Sutton could not argue, yet he stayed beside Caesar, checking his pulse and breathing. Everything remained steady, calm, even as if the sounds were passing through Caesar rather than coming from him. Then, without warning, the episode stopped. Caesar slumped forward, exhausted, his breath shallow. The old songs, he murmured. The ones they sang on the ships, in the fields, in the quarters at night. I've carried them so long I forgot they weren't mine. They wanted to be sung one last time before they were released. Over the next day, Caesar would sometimes begin singing again, sometimes alone, sometimes as though joined by unseen voices. Dr. Sutton, despite his training, found himself deeply affected. The melodies carried deep sorrow and deep strength at the same time, proof of humanity surviving where it was never meant to survive. On the night of May 8th, everything reached its height. Thomas Fletcher, staying at the boarding house with Dr. Sutton, was awakened by frantic pounding at the door. Samuel Pritchard had heard screams from Caesar's cabin. The three men ran through the dark and arrived to find every lamp inside lit. More than any of them remembered Caesar owning. The air felt heavy, charged, making their skin prickle. Caesar stood in the center of the room, though he had been too weak to stand alone for weeks. His arms were stretched wide, his face tilted upward, and he spoke rapidly in what sounded like many languages at once. Voices overlapped and tangled together, creating a chorus that no single throat should produce. Sutton caught bits of English, fragments that might have been African languages, and others he could not place at all. The feeling in the room was deeply disturbing. Should we hold him down? Pritchard asked, trembling. Don't touch him, Sutton said, though he could not explain why. Something told him that whatever was happening had to finish on its own, and that stopping it might cause harm they could not imagine. The layered speech continued, growing louder and more intense, the voices seeming to argue among themselves. Then, suddenly, it stopped. The lamps flickered. The heaviness in the air faded. Caesar slowly lowered his arms and looked directly at them. His face was calm, almost peaceful. I understand now, he said in his own familiar voice. This was never about me living forever. It was about carrying forward the lives that were cut short, the stories that would have disappeared. That woman did not make me immortal. She made me a vessel. Every enslaved person I met who died too soon left something behind with me. Their memories, their years, their witness. I became a living archive of suffering and survival. That isn't possible, Dr. Sutton said, though the words sounded empty even to him. "Science does not yet understand the mind," Caesar replied as he moved back to his chair, steadier than before. "You study the brain, doctor, and you know much about how it works. But where does a memory live? Where is identity stored? Why do people remember things that never happened to them, or feel at home in places they have never been?" Sutton had no answer. Caesar sat down with a visible sense of relief. "I know what I lived through. I know I carried the testimonies of hundreds who deserved to be remembered. And now I can let them go. Their stories are written. Their witness remains. The bond is complete." He smiled faintly. "I can finally rest. The debt is paid. The weight is lifting. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I feel light. I had forgotten what it felt like to be only myself, to hold memories that belonged to me alone, without carrying the grief and joy of so many others." "What does that mean?" Fletcher asked quietly, though he already sensed the answer. "In real terms, what happens now?" "It means," Caesar said softly, "that the time has finally come for me to die. The years that were borrowed are going back to wherever such things return. The body has done what it was meant to do. Now the body can break, and what it carried can scatter to whatever place awaits it." He looked at each of them slowly, his eyes clear and fully present in a way they had not been for many weeks. "Thank you, all of you, for taking care of an old man whose life made no sense on its own. Thank you for writing down what was hard to believe, for standing as witnesses to the witnesses I carried inside me. The journals will tell the stories, but you can tell the truth about what it cost to keep them alive." Caesar Bowen lived for 7 more days after that night. They were days of slow, peaceful decline, so unlike the crisis that had come before that Dr. Sutton noted it in his records. It was as if he had already died in some important way, and now the body was only finishing the formal steps required for leaving this world. Dr. Sutton stayed at the cabin almost all the time during this period, unwilling to leave Caesar by himself. Fletcher continued working through the journals but spent several hours each day sitting with the old man, sometimes speaking, sometimes sharing quiet companionship. Martha Hoyt brought food and kept the cabin in order with calm efficiency. Samuel Pritchard stopped by every day to see if anything was needed. Caesar slept more and more, but when he was awake, his mind was unusually clear. He spoke about his life with a sharpness that suggested the breaking apart had ended, that he had finally returned to being only himself. "I was born in February," he told them one afternoon. "I remember the cold, always cold during that first winter. My mother wrapped me in whatever pieces of cloth she could find, but it was never quite enough. Still, she sang to me. Old songs her mother had taught her, songs from a place she had never seen but somehow remembered. I think that was when it began, that understanding that memory could go beyond one life, that the past could move forward in ways that did not fit logic." He spoke again about the woman who had performed the ritual, describing her in greater detail than ever before. Her name was Amarachi. In her language it meant God's grace, though very little grace had been given to her in life. She had been brought across the ocean on the ships as a young woman, survived the Middle Passage, survived the breaking of spirit meant to turn people into property. Yet she kept something inside her, knowledge, power, call it what you want. She saw something in me, some ability to hold more than a child should ever hold. So she chose me for this weight, this gift, this terrible responsibility of extended witness. During those final days, Caesar also spoke about specific people whose memories he had carried, describing them with such care and warmth that they became real to everyone listening. Lydia, who lost her children but never lost her dignity. Joshua, who taught himself to read even though the punishment for that knowledge was severe. Sarah, who chose death instead of continued bondage, a choice Caesar described as the last claim of control in a system built to take all control away. "I have thought often about the rightness of what happened to me," Caesar said on May 13th, his voice barely louder than breath. "Was it right for Amarachi to turn me into a vessel without my consent? I was a child, I had no choice. But then I think about the other option. Hundreds of stories disappearing forever. Hundreds of lives erased as if they never existed. Which is worse, to place the weight of many lives on one person, or to let suffering pass undocumented, unrecognized and forgotten. Dr. Sutton, who had been checking Caesar's pulse, looked up. "What do you think the answer is?" "I believe," Caesar said slowly, "that the question itself is the answer. The fact that we can ask it, struggle with it, and see how complex it is, that is what matters. Slavery tried to turn human beings into objects, into things without moral value. By saving these stories, by insisting they mattered, by witnessing the humanity of people the system tried to erase, that was resistance, that was victory, even inside terrible loss." On May 14th, Caesar asked to be taken outside. It was a warm spring day, unusual for mid-May in Ohio, and the sky was clear and blue. They carried him out in his chair and placed him beneath an old oak tree whose branches had likely given shade for more than 50 years. Caesar sat there for hours, his face turned toward the sun, speaking now and then, but mostly just breathing the air, watching clouds drift by, listening to birds. At one point he said, "I had forgotten how beautiful the world could be when you are no longer carrying so much sorrow. It is extraordinary. Every leaf, every blade of grass, every change in the light, all of it feels precious." That evening they carried him back inside. He was weaker now, eating very little, sleeping far more than he was awake, but when he did wake he was calm and fully himself. On the morning of May 15th, Caesar woke early. Dr. Sutton, who had been dozing in a chair nearby, was alerted by the sound of his voice. "Doctor," the old man said quietly, "I want to thank you for everything. For believing me when you had no reason to. For writing down what you saw even when it challenged your understanding. For treating me like a person and not a curiosity." "It has been my honor," Dr. Sutton replied, and he meant it. "The journals," Caesar said, "promise me they will be protected. Promise me historians will be allowed to read them. The stories inside are all that remains of so many people. They deserve to be known." "I promise," Dr. Sutton said firmly. Caesar nodded, satisfied. "Good, that is good." He closed his eyes for a moment, gathering strength. When he opened them again, he looked directly at the doctor. "I am ready now. I can feel it coming, and I am not afraid. I have lived long enough. I have seen enough. I carried what I was meant to carry, and now I can put it down. Is there anything you need?" Dr. Sutton asked. "Anything I can do. Just stay," Caesar whispered. "Do not let me die alone. That is all anyone really wants at the end. I will stay," Dr. Sutton promised. Fletcher arrived later that morning, sensing somehow that this would be the last day. He brought fresh flowers from Martha Hoot's garden and placed them in a jar beside the bed. Caesar smiled when he saw them, a small but real smile. "Lilacs," he murmured. "I have not seen lilacs in years. My mother told me they grew in the gardens of the big house, but we were never allowed close enough to see them. Now they are here, brought to me like a gift. The world is strange and sometimes kind." As the day went on, Caesar drifted in and out of sleep. When he was awake, he spoke now and then, sometimes clearly, sometimes in broken phrases only he understood. He said names they recognized from the journals. He hummed pieces of songs. He smiled at memories only he could see. Around 2 in the afternoon, he opened his eyes and looked at Dr. Sutton with sudden sharp awareness. "Thank you for witnessing my witness. Make sure the journals survive. Make sure the stories are told. Make sure people know we were here, that we mattered, that our suffering, our resistance, and our humanity were real and worthy of remembrance." "I will," Dr. Sutton said, his throat tight. "I promise you, Caesar, your witness will not be forgotten." Caesar smiled, peaceful, his weathered face transformed. "That is all I needed to hear. That is enough." He closed his eyes for the final time. His breathing slowed, grew shallow, with longer spaces between each breath. Dr. Sutton held his hand, checking his pulse, watching life fade with the trained part of his mind even as the human part mourned. At 2:47 p.m. Caesar Bowen took his last breath. It was gentle and quiet, simply a breath that was not followed by another. Dr. Sutton waited, checked again for a pulse, found none. He placed his hand over Caesar's chest, feeling for a heartbeat. There was nothing. The body remained warm, calm, the expression on Caesar's face serene. "He is gone," Dr. Sutton said softly. Fletcher rose from the corner and stood beside the bed. The two men remained there in silence for several minutes, feeling the weight of what they had witnessed. At last, Dr. Sutton closed Caesar's eyes and pulled the sheet over his face. "I will notify the coroner," Fletcher said, and I will send word to Martha and Samuel." The county coroner, Dr. William Hayes, arrived within the hour. He was a practical man, careful and thorough, doubtful of anything that could not be measured. He examined Caesar's body with professional distance, taking notes and measurements. When he finished, he looked at Dr. Sutton with clear discomfort. "I have been a physician for 32 years, he said. "I have examined hundreds of bodies. I do not have proper terms for what I am seeing." "What did you find?" Sutton asked. Hayes looked at his notes. "The bone structure is unlike anything I have seen in someone of ordinary old age. The density is wrong. The wear patterns are wrong. The level of deterioration does not fit known models. The teeth show signs of use that would require decades beyond a normal lifespan. The skin, what remains of it, shows aging beyond anything documented in medical literature. The internal organs," he paused, shaking his head. "They appear to have functioned far beyond expected limits. Can you confirm his recorded age?" Fletcher asked. "Can you say for certain he was 126 years old?" "I cannot confirm it through examination alone," Hayes admitted. "But I also cannot dismiss it. Every physical sign suggests extreme age far beyond normal human limits. If someone told me this body was 150 years old, I could not dispute it based on the evidence. It should be impossible, but the evidence points there." He wrote his official report that evening, choosing every word with care. "The physical findings point to a condition of extremely advanced age, although giving an exact number is hard because the tissue shows unusual patterns of breakdown and decay. The bones indicate a lifespan far beyond what is considered normal for a human being. The condition of the teeth shows wear that would only come from very long and repeated use over an extended period of time. There was no clear single cause of death, other than total body failure linked to extreme old age. The recorded age of 126 years cannot be fully proven by physical examination alone. Yet the evidence also does not allow doctors to dismiss it outright. This situation raises questions that go beyond what modern medicine can currently explain. Caesar was buried 2 days later at Woodland Cemetery in Xenia, placed in a plot that Dr. Sutton paid for himself. The funeral was small, with around 30 people present. Those in attendance included Dr. Sutton, Fletcher, Martha Whit, Samuel Pritchard, several nearby neighbors, and an unexpectedly large number of elderly African Americans from surrounding areas. They had heard of Caesar's passing and came to honor him. One elderly woman, likely close to 80 years old herself, told Dr. Sutton that her grandmother used to speak of Caesar. She said he was already old when her grandmother was young, that he remembered events no living person should have been able to remember, and that he carried stories so others would not lose them. She said they would not forget. The gravestone was plain but respectful, reading simply Caesar Bowen 1762–1888. He remembered. The 63 journals were carefully wrapped, packed, and taken to Dr. Sutton's home. There he built a special protective case to keep them safe. Over the next 15 years of his life, Dr. Sutton devoted himself to studying the journals in detail. He compared every claim that could be checked, searched for descendants of people mentioned in the writings, and traveled to places described in the entries. As his research continued, his belief that Caesar had been truthful only grew stronger. Every detail that could be verified turned out to be accurate. The people Caesar said he met were real. The events he wrote about had truly happened. The locations he described matched historical records with striking precision. In 1895, Dr. Sutton published a book titled The Extended Witness, which examined extreme longevity from both a medical and historical point of view. The book offered a full analysis of Caesar's case and included large portions of the journals, medical records, coroner reports, and confirmations of historical facts. Caesar's story was presented alongside careful scientific discussion, clearly separating what could be proven from what remained unexplained. Despite the depth of research, the book was poorly received by much of the scientific community. Critics claimed Dr. Sutton had been fooled by an elaborate deception. They argued that the journals were likely written by several different people over many years and later credited to a single man. Others said the historical accuracy was coincidence or the result of Caesar having access to written records. Some suggested the medical evidence was misunderstood or overstated. The Journal of the American Medical Association published a harsh critique. It stated that while Dr. Sutton's work was detailed, it depended on the impossible idea that a human lived to the age of 126, and even more unbelievable, that he somehow carried the memories of others. The review claimed such ideas had no basis in biology and represented a dangerous break from scientific discipline. It concluded that Dr. Sutton, once respected, had allowed emotional involvement to override reason. Still, Dr. Sutton did not change his position. He answered criticism calmly, offered more documentation, invited skeptics to inspect the journals themselves, and even offered to pay for independent reviews of his research. Very few accepted. For many, it was easier to dismiss the case than to seriously examine evidence that challenged basic beliefs about biology and the mind. In the final entry of his own journal, written shortly before his death in 1903, Dr. Sutton admitted that he could not scientifically prove how Caesar Bowen lived for 126 years. He could not explain through known biological processes how one man could hold such a vast collection of memories. He could not demonstrate through experiments how consciousness might move beyond a single body or how memories could pass between people. But he wrote that he knew what he personally witnessed. He trusted the documents, the historical confirmations, and the testimony of people who had known Caesar over many decades. He believed that understanding Caesar required accepting that consciousness, memory, and human experience may be far more complex than science currently allows. He suggested that future generations might one day explain what he could only record. Until then, he stood by his account of Caesar's witness and trusted that truth, even when strange, would eventually be acknowledged. After Dr. Sutton's death, the journals were donated to the Ohio Historical Society in 1904. For many years they were rarely studied, stored in archives as unusual items, occasionally viewed but never fully appreciated. It was not until the 1960s, during the Civil Rights Movement, that interest in slave narratives brought renewed attention to Caesar's writings. Historians reviewing the journals with new perspectives began to understand their immense value as first-hand historical sources. They confirmed dozens of specific details, including names, dates, events, and locations that Caesar would not have been able to know through ordinary means unless he had been present or had access to primary sources that no longer existed. Dr. Patricia Morrison, a historian who spent 5 years studying the journals during the 1970s, wrote that whether Caesar truly lived for 126 years was less important than what the journals represented. She described them as the most complete first-person account of the African-American slave experience across many states, decades, and conditions. She noted the consistency of detail, the emotional honesty, and the accuracy of verifiable facts. These qualities, she argued, made the journals invaluable regardless of how they were created. If Caesar truly absorbed the memories of others, then he preserved voices that would otherwise have vanished. If the journals were compiled from multiple sources and attributed to one man, then someone went to extraordinary effort to save those stories. Either way, the importance of the content could not be denied. Modern DNA testing of hair samples kept in Dr. Sutton's collection has produced intriguing but inconclusive results. The length of the telomeres suggests cellular aging far beyond normal expectations. However, scientists warn that the age and condition of the samples prevent firm conclusions. The mystery of how Caesar Bowen lived to such an age remains unanswered. The question of whether he truly carried the memories of others has no scientific agreement. Parapsychologists point to his case as support for ideas of shared consciousness or memory transfer. Skeptics continue to believe it was an elaborate hoax or an extreme case of false memory. Religious scholars see possible divine meaning or spiritual purpose. Neuroscientists admit that much about memory, consciousness, and the limits of the human brain is still unknown, leaving room for things not yet explained. What is certain is that Caesar Bowen was real. Birth records, sales documents, freedom papers, census listings, land deeds, and death certificates all confirm a man who lived in Greene County, Ohio for more than 60 years and claimed to have been born during the reign of King George III. What is certain is that he left behind 63 journals filled with detailed accounts of life under slavery. What is certain is that doctors, coroners, and witnesses recorded his extraordinary age and unusual physical condition. What is certain is that he spent his final years making sure suffering was remembered and acts of resistance were honored. In Greene County, elderly residents still sometimes speak of the old man who remembered everything, who carried the burden of his people's pain, who lived to see a nation born and the system that enslaved him finally fall. They speak with both respect and discomfort, as if admitting that some mysteries cannot be neatly explained, and as if recognizing that in the rush to explain everything logically, certain truths can be overlooked. Caesar's cabin remained standing for 40 years after his death, slowly decaying. Locals spoke of strange experiences there, unexplained sounds, sudden cold areas, and an uneasy sense of presence. When the cabin was torn down in 1928, workers claimed they heard singing as the walls collapsed, old songs in unfamiliar languages that faded as the last boards were removed. The land remained unused for many years. Neighbors said nothing grew well there. Plants died, grass turned yellow, and even weeds failed to thrive. In 1965, the area was covered with asphalt and turned into a parking lot, and whatever lingered there was sealed away and largely forgotten. But the journals still exist. They are preserved in climate-controlled archives, open to scholars, students, and anyone willing to engage with the testimony of a man who claimed to live longer than possible, who claimed to carry memories beyond his own, and who devoted his long and unlikely life to making sure suffering, endurance, and survival would not disappear. Whether Caesar Bowen truly lived for 126 years, whether he truly absorbed the memories of others through some unknown process, whether these questions will ever be fully answered remains uncertain. Whether Amarachi's ritual truly changed his connection to time and awareness is something we may never fully know. These questions might never be answered with complete certainty. Science may one day create new ways to explain events that now feel impossible to understand, or this mystery may remain unsolved forever, standing as a reminder of how limited human knowledge can be. Yet maybe the most important question is not how he managed to live for so many years, but what he decided to do with that long life. He could have used it for his own benefit, or for revenge against those who once enslaved him for their own cruel purposes. Instead, he made a different choice. He chose to remember. He chose to write things down, to observe, and to bear witness. He turned his impossible life into a living archive for stories that would have disappeared when their storytellers died. He chose to honor people who history might have completely erased. In the end, that may be the true mystery and the true legacy of Caesar Bowen. Not the unbelievable length of his life, but the depth of his devotion to honoring the lives of people history would have otherwise ignored and forgotten. His story pushes us to think about what we decide to remember, whose voices and testimonies we believe matter, and whether we are willing to accept that some truths exist beyond traditional proof. It also challenges us to think about whether consciousness and memory work in ways we have not yet discovered. It makes us wonder if the boundaries between individuals are more open than we assume, and whether pain, memory, and testimony can leave marks that last beyond a single body or brain. Most of all, it reminds us that the greatest mysteries are often not about magic or the supernatural, but about the depth of human experience, the strength of the human spirit, and the extreme lengths people will go to make sure truth survives, suffering is recognized, and the dead are remembered. This mystery shows us that the strongest legacy is not money, fame, or power, but the decision to bear witness, to remember, and to make sure lives lived in darkness are finally brought into the light. What do you think about this story? Do you believe it was possible for one man to live for so long, or do you think there is a more logical explanation we have not yet found? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want more horror tales like it, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share this with someone who loves mysteries. I'll see you in the next video.